Three, two, one.
Hey, good morning.
Good
What's up,
morning.
my
Morning.
people? Hey, we've got a great group on this screen this morning. Like we are power packing it through. It is a wonderful, beautiful day. I am Davina Clarity. We have Jurgen. And you know what? I'm not used to opening it up. Jurgen is usually the one that's just saying, hey, da da da. But you know what? Let me just open this up by first saying a happy day today. And today is our last Friday in February, and we are talking about Black History Month. And we wanted to squeak it in before February was over. And we're going to talk about Black history and the fight for diversity. And we've got some couple of powerhouse guests on with us today. And so we're gonna do an introduction all the way through. So I will start. I'm Davina Clarity, and I up to the left here.
Good morning, Davina. This is Jurgen, and to the left of me, I believe.
Got your boy Steve.
And
Steve Chung.
I guess Steve is probably known and well enough known that he can just say it's your boy Steve.
It's your boy Steve, right? And actually, we'll give a little bit of an introduction. We'll let you introduce yourself. But before, we're going to go through. We have a team member. Let's get it right here. It's our boy Josh Eisen, and he is our. You want to give yourself a little quick introduction, Mr. Josh?
Sure. My name is Josh Eisen. I'm a broker here in Olympia, and I'm also very interested in DEI work and creating some equity within the real estate industry and also for homeowners. And so I joined the committee, DEI, Thurston County Realtor Association DEI committee, and then I became the chair this year. So that's a great honor. And I also am on the Washington State DEI Realtor Association committee. So kind of having two hands in it. And it's good because we can share a lot of information and pass this on to our brokers here in Thurston County.
Absolutely. And without further ado, we are going to introduce Dotcy Isom. You are awesome. Awesome Isom. So Dotcy, will you give yourself a quick little introduction? And, you know, we are going to be talking about DEI and a lot of, the fight for diversity today as we're going through a really interesting season, a very different season in these last couple of years. And so who is Dotcy?
Wow, thanks, Davina. And it's great to be on. Dotcy Isom, and I'm glad somebody got the name right. Love that. And I'm currently working as a diversity consultant for John L. Scott. And prior to that, I had despite my boyish looks, a 40-year career in human resources, working for a number of companies, primarily in the Midwest and East Coast. So I was leading HR, and along with those responsibilities were diversity and equity, inclusion. Back in the days when it was first beginning, it was really just thought of as diversity and springing out from EEO, equal employment opportunity. And those things began to grow into understanding that it's more than just government compliance programs. And we began to understand what diversity means and how to change those things into not just getting a mix of employees, but making them feel included. The companies I was with included JP Morgan, and I relocated to the Pacific Northwest to join Starbucks about 17 years ago, and left Starbucks, went to T-Mobile, stayed there about 12 years, and retired a couple of years ago. And since then, I've been doing this.
Well, we are absolutely glad to have you on. And we were having some conversations yesterday about what we were going to actually talk about. And we just kept diving back into conversation. All of us were just kept diving back in. So this is a really great opportunity to really talk about just what's going on in our real estate. I'm not going to dominate the floor here. I feel like I'm talking too much. So
No, I mean,
You've got the
David,
floor,
I
Dana.
think it's great what you've got started here because it is Black History Month, and the conversation is completely appropriate and timely to be talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if we kind of focus in, and Dotcy, if you're okay, if we kind of focus some things in on you, Josh is also great because of his experiences and what he's doing as well. But
Yeah.
on your side, you've had this executive type HR experience with a lot of large companies. And what kind of guided you in on really getting more engaged in DEI work? And then also specifically, we talked about this a little bit. For you to associate with a company and say that they have value, that I want to work with them on a project like this, what attracted you to working with John L. Scott specifically with this DEI effort?
Well, Jurgen, there's a lot there. But when I began working in HR at these companies, and you could pick almost any one of the three that I mentioned, but in those HR functions, I was primarily consulting to business leaders, helping them understand their employee programs and how they could improve the employees' productivity, how employees can feel more connected to the company can work better with them. And as I began looking at that, oftentimes in these meetings, I would notice I was the only, and they sometimes say it's lonely being only. I would be oftentimes in conference rooms with leadership. I'd be the only Black person in the room. There wouldn't be very many others, even when you walk the halls on the executive floors. And I began to be drawn to what can I do to help these companies improve in that space, whether it's development programs, training programs, and a myriad of things. And I was doing those kinds of things at all those companies. But over time, and you reach a point where you're sort of trying to decide what you want to do next. And so flash forward to 2020, and I had just wrapped up probably the biggest thing that we did at T-Mobile, and we won a number of diversity awards. We put out some great bias training, training that focuses on unconscious bias and all those sorts of things. And I was really ready to kind of branch out and do my own thing and frankly retire. And we had the sad murder of George Floyd in May, which was happening in the midst of a global pandemic. So obviously my retirement wasn't going quite the way I thought it would go. No travel, no nothing. But at that point, my phone began just blowing up with people from companies, leaders that I'd worked with at other companies, just acquaintances, HR people that, you networked with after 20, 30 years in the business. And they were calling frequently saying, hey, our Black employees are feeling frustrated. They're letting us know that this has really brought to the surface what has been simmering underneath for a long time, that they don't feel opportunities, they don't feel connected, don't feel the same way that others may feel in the company around what they're able to do. And this incident in May became a sort of a catalyst. But it was so much that was going on, I could scarcely manage it. But I began to look at John L. Scott when they reached out, and I knew a few people at John L. Scott, not necessarily in leadership, but they connected me there. I wound up having a very long conversation with Lennox about what his vision was and what he was trying to do. Because when you have that many things going on, I really wanted to connect to a company that I thought was genuinely focused on this issue, both changing the environment, the climate externally, and changing the environment and climate internally. And I felt that Lennox's vision and what he wanted to do affected both. And for me, it had to be internal and external. And so I joined. And since that time, I found that his heart is real. He's very much focused on it. But the opportunity was to help, because there's so many things you can do, and how do you convert a vision and an understanding and a new awakening into action? And so my role here has been to try and help bring a focus to that and look at things we can do.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. There's way beyond lip service to what's going on, even to bring someone like you aboard. And Josh, I know last night you definitely had a lot of different questions and a lot of experiences going in with DEI and just how you grew up, and you and Dotcy were getting along great on a lot of that.
Yeah, it's been a road for me. I think there's growing up biracial in Washington, in a predominantly white city of Centralia. It was, I was a little blind to how race worked in America and in the world, specifically in America. And it really wasn't until I went down to Oakland and San Francisco, and where I was in a community with just a much higher percentage of Black and different races, and I was confronted by my own internal kind of biases, and all of that had been shaped by all of the things in our lives, and it really kind of woke me up. And at one point I was pulled aside and by another biracial woman who was a doctor and amazing human, and she was like, we can be bridges because we know both of these experiences. And so it really kind of, once I entered into real estate, you can do this work anywhere. You can do the DEI work, and as Dotcy can attest, you can do it in any kind of company, in any kind of community. And I think real estate is a great place to do it because we touch so much of the community through housing and all of the different industries that touch housing, which is hundreds of industries that you can make a difference in. So, and one of the things that attracted me to John L. Scott was the diversity of this group. And after talking to Lennox, I did have a conversation with him after a Washington Realtor DEI committee, and he sat in on that. And he called me afterwards and was like, wow, this is great. And then he shared what John L. Scott's corporate vision was for the DEI work. And I was so impressed. Like, it just went beyond what I had kind of expected, from John L. Scott and from Lennox. But it was great to see, and it was super exciting because, like, it's clear that we are a leader in this space, and we can spread that information and kind of initiation to do the work out to our fellow brokerages here.
Yeah.
And just to add a little bit of context, because I know Dotcy and Josh both mentioned Lennox, and some people might say, well, who's Lennox? And Lennox Scott is the grandson of John L. Scott. He is our CEO of the entire John L. Scott corporation. So just wanted to give a little context of who he is. Like, he is the top, and again, leadership and the flow from it trickles down from the top, and that's one of the things that we've really are honored to be a part of the John L. Scott organization, because our leadership is amazing. So
And
just a little context there.
Even building a little off of that, Lennox's third generation real estate, incepted in Seattle and being engaged through it all this time. I think with what happened with George Floyd, with all that, it really opened his eyes. And when he understood so much of how the role that real estate specifically had played in keeping minorities down, or the redlining, a bunch of things we can talk about. When he really understood that impact, he's made it a very personal mission to help make the changes. And Dotcy, that might be a great question to start with is, with that in mind, you have been working very closely and helping to lead through this. What is it that, like, within John L. Scott is one thing, but overall, what is it that is being changed or is raising awareness in real estate to help facilitate change or to initiate change?
Wow, the real estate industry, and you mentioned redlining, and I think people sort of have heard that term. It's something that comes up every now and then. So it might be worth saying just a second of more specifically what it is, and then how the real estate industry is, I think, changing now, particularly with John L. Scott's leadership. But redlining was just a term back when housing starts began following the GI Bill and others, where the government was deciding how to help banks determine where they could lend money. And essentially, they drew on maps in cities, primarily, not so much in rural areas, red lines around areas that would designate where funds and loans and government loans, housing loans could be made, and essentially where they couldn't be made. And as you can imagine, those lines fell squarely among racial communities and in Black communities, as well as other underserved communities, but primarily in the Black communities. The red lines meant you could not get a home loan to build there. And that extended, and because people couldn't get loans, builders ultimately wouldn't build there, and they would be zoned differently with apartments versus housing versus single family homes and all of that. So flash forward to now, and if you a good choice for reading might be, a good book reference might be The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, and that really gives a wonderful history of redlining and how that affected everything that exists today, from schools, the choices that people have. People just sort of look around, I wonder why neighborhoods are the way they are. This is why. And so from a real estate industry, there have always been for brokers requirements to understand what fair housing is. But what we've been doing at John L. Scott, and particularly Lennox working at the national level, is creating required training for brokers that was about 15 minutes of the required training of getting a license to many hours of training that really understand what is unconscious bias and how can that sometimes affect brokers in the choices they make about homes they offer, what they assume about people, that sort of thing. And adding to that, other training which reminds brokers primarily, whether they're helping buyers or sellers, understand what does discrimination really look like, not from just the letter of the law, but how you might encounter it in real life, they might say, IRL, and what to do about it. And so now we've been pushing that training on a national basis, trying to require the probably over 1 million brokers across the country to understand that training and what they can do. And by doing that, you're really affecting possibilities in the future.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. It's interesting that just in the last couple of years, we have become, we as a country have been so numb to just kind of with blinders on the systemic issues with diversity, that it was a norm, and now we've been having conversations about DEI, and even still, it's okay, getting the questions, what does that stand for? There's another, acronym, BIPOC, and that, what is, and these are all new acronyms that we are now getting acquainted with or reacquainted with in regards to how to identify populations of people, Black people, indigenous, people of color that have really been underserved over the years. Because even as a Black person, not even realizing or having it in the forefront that some of the things that are just normal really shouldn't be normal, right? So just a little bit about you talked about the redlining. There are also other things, and there are a few initiatives, and I don't know if I'm kind of hijacking or going off track, but there are those few initiatives that are really at the forefront that really run in line with that. Do you want to talk about that, like what John L. Scott, like what we're really focusing on in right now, what's really important?
Yeah, absolutely. There were 3 big initiatives, DEI initiatives that John L. Scott has doing. And to show why I joined the company, these were in place before I joined. One of them is called the 90th Year Project, and John L. Scott just last year celebrated its 90th year, so it was named after that. And that project was to create scholarship opportunities for Black students that are majoring in education at University of Washington and other local universities within the John L. Scott footprint. And you might ask, well, why that? And doesn't that seem limited? Well, Lennox, in his research and reading, and for people who are in the business, we understand that, in the diversity business, we understand that, is that when a Black student in high school sees one Black teacher, they are 34% more likely to graduate. That's 34% more likely to graduate, and about 38% more likely not just to graduate and complete it, but to move on into college. So recognizing that, and we recognize the payoff is a long way out for that. By the time a person graduates from college and gets their teaching certificate and begins to teach in those public schools, but that is a systemic change, and that was what Davina just mentioned, the word systemic change that just changes the outlook for students. So that's why that was so important, and it may not resonate, but it's helpful to know why. The second big initiative I mentioned already was training, and so the two trainings, and one is called Bias Override. The other one is Fair Haven, which is a housing simulation that I mentioned that helps brokers understand what scenarios they might encounter. Those two trainings are mandated within the John L. Scott leadership. Our relo committees and everybody in the relocation group, which helps folks who are relocating from city to city with their real estate practices, and he's beginning to push that out throughout, and it's already been done within the corporate office. And so training, again, is very, very important. But the third one, which has been maybe flying a little bit under the radar, is the removal of racist language in covenants and deeds. And for some people who've seen it, it pops up on the local news from time to time. I saw a story about 3 weeks ago. But people don't realize that even though they have long since been banned and are illegal, when you look at your deeds in certain subdivisions and homes and properties within Seattle and across the country, frankly, you'll find language that says, no Black person may occupy this home. Well, they used a different word instead of Black person. May occupy this home. In fact, they talked about other races as well. Could occupy this home unless they were a servant, but they could not own this home or live in this home. And that language is still on deeds and titles and restrictive covenants within subdivisions to this day. And so we've created a program in partnership with Amazon, AWS, to automate a process where going to a website and a person can put in their home address and determine, it'll search the titles, find that language, and if the language is there, it pops up basically a form. You can click a button and it will strike through that language. Again, it is symbolic, but that's the awakening that people need to understand that this language has been out there, which helps again explain where people are. So those are the three big initiatives. We're trying to push that language change, restrictive covenant change across nationally. It's sort of automated in Washington, and the site is not quite ready for prime time, but it's on its way. It's still being tested, but that's it. And we're trying to partner with brokerages across this country to help them have their legislatures allow this same kind of technology to be in place and work across the board, because in every big city, these covenants and that language still exists. So those are the three big initiatives.
Nice.
Wow, that technology is really cool. This is the first I've heard about that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it'll even do an e-notary to get it notarized. It's amazing.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Steve.
and as you mentioned, the racist language, one of the things that has recently come that to change is even identifying master bedroom. We use that term very, not even realizing, why it was even called a master bedroom, and that really is not the correct language in regarding, so now that's been, called a primary room, or so just eye-opening a lot of things in with change, and changes definitely can be uncomfortable, but change is needed and change is good. So
And Steve, you've got Last night you had some engaging conversation in there too. Like, how are you feeling about the conversation right now?
I think it's great that it's being brought up. I this is something that hasn't really been brought to the forefront in just years, and now it's part of the conversation. And I myself am learning, and going through the fair housing or the fair housing simulation was a bit eye opening. In regards to some of the biases that I've had or just wasn't aware of. So it's good to be able to have these conversations and being able to put it out and help even our peers, you know, uh, educate our peers on this stuff.
And a good observation from Marlene, just truly eye-opening. And wow, absolutely. I just, it's first that awareness, even being aware that there is an issue. And then, well, once you know, what are you going to do? And, just steps and progressions. Even Dotcy, you'd mentioned, about having a Black teacher having such an impact. Just the fact that a teacher is there in a position to help know that there are steps above. You don't have this cap. And that
Right.
made me think about even the conversation about representation and representation in media, in leadership, and all these things. And I don't think until we started having better conversations about it, I understood really what representation meant. I mean, when you don't ever see anybody of your own ethnicity or color in positions of power without ever having a word spoken about a ceiling, there's a feeling that there's a ceiling.
It absolutely is. And it's sometimes what people innately realize in anything is that it's difficult to be the first. And people tend to think it's unlikely that they will be the first. So if there's no representation, then you instinctively realize you would have to be the first one to break through that ceiling. And then they talk about the glass ceiling. And so, yeah, representation is so very important, and that's why that initiative is so important. And we've seen, if anybody watched the Olympics, there's that woman, and I will not, her name will suddenly won't come to me, but the first Black uh, gold medalist in the bobsled, and the commercial shows a young girl looking at a bobsledder with a Black bobsled. And then it flash forwards, and that young girl looking at her 20 years ago was her. She just looked at a Black person in a bobsled. And then flash forward, she now is the Black person who won. And there's another young girl, a little girl looking at it, because suddenly seeing one person creates a possibility. Because one person saw one person. She's now, I think, has more medals in a winter Olympics for a Black athlete. So it's always about representation and seeing yourself and being able to imagine yourself. Owning a home is a first time thing for people. And that's why this real estate subject is so very important to me, because there are generations of people for whom home ownership, I won't say it isn't a possibility, but it's not even something it's not even a conceptual idea in their heads, because they have generationally thought it wasn't possible or lived in other situations, which isn't to say living in another situation than owning a home is different. But generational wealth, we all know that, is best accomplished through home ownership and property ownership. And we're trying to help people see that as a possibility. So some of the things we're trying to do now at John L. Scott is to work directly with community agencies like the Urban League, the YMCA, and we're just beginning to have these partnerships, just understand what the partnership possibilities are. So we're scratching the surface. I'm not saying they are done yet, but we're now understanding through the conversations and focus groups that we've had with different employees of color within John L. Scott, we're understanding that we can make a difference. And that representation isn't just about gold medals or executives. It's about understanding I can own a home.
Yeah, that's good. And Josh, you know what? You're so nice, like waiting for a spot to hop in on.
Yeah, we were talking about that too in the Washington Realtors, and it's like, okay, well, first I think we're almost on an information finding mission, right? So we're trying to find partners that are already dealing with these communities, that are already helping these communities and communicating with them, Asian communities and Black communities, and trying to figure out, okay, what are the hurdles that you are encountering, and we're doing that hopefully from the mortgage broker side as well. And because a lot of this is tied into, the ability of getting a loan and working towards being able to, maybe you're not ready this year to buy a house, but working with the right mortgage professionals to, get you in a position to buy a house, and then moving into that direction, because it's a multi-phase operation. And, within the committee and within the brokerages, I think, just like anything, I think we kind of get stuck in what we know. And what we know is kind of a rock in the stream, right? And once we know it, and that's our reality. And then, but there has to be some kind of easing and softening of that, and being able to kind of bring a what would we call a beginner's mind in meditation, or and say, okay, maybe I don't know everything about what's going on, and like you can know everything you can about real estate. You're in it for 20 years, but there's still a lot of nuance and hidden spaces in homeownership, within race, within culture, that you may not be seeing. And I think what we're trying to encourage our designated brokers and people who are at the leadership within Thurston County is to just step back and say, okay, let me just listen. Let me just try to figure out what I'm not seeing, and then let's go from there.
Yeah. Josh, you mentioned about, what you know, and I think that's a bit of like those biases and other things. And Dotcy, in your background, I don't think it's unintentional that it's do the right thing, right?
You're right. This is what a good eye. Yeah, this is and not a lot of people necessarily recognize that screenshot, but yes, that's definitely from Spike Lee's "Do the Right Thing," and following again the murder of George Floyd, I made that my background for a lot of meetings and things I attend, because it can subtly send that signal.
And I think it's interesting that you have it back there, because it's kind of do the right thing. But like when you contrast that to what Josh had mentioned about people knowing what they know, and then we have these biases, how do we do the right thing? Because the right thing is perception in so many ways, and a lot of our perceptions are skewed.
Wow, that's a great question, and I don't even know quite how to approach it. But doing the right thing, I think, begins with sort of self-education. I like what Josh was saying, beginner's mind. I hadn't heard that expression, but it's beginning to just understand what biases are. And the word bias can sometimes have a real negative connotation, but bias just simply means that as humans, our brains work to categorize things and put things together so that we don't have to think about it. I mean, imagine driving a car. If you had to think about every turn signal every time you do this, when you first learned, you were wavering your way down the road, and now you can unconsciously drive a car and listen to the radio and hopefully not talk on your phone and text, but you can sort of do it automatically, and you're on autopilot. And as humans, we do things automatically, and sometimes that's where we automatically assume things about people and groups because it's autopilot. So one of the things we can begin to do, Jared, is to try and slow ourselves down and ask why did we think that way? Why did we suddenly have this uncomfortable inner sensation? Why did we do that? And kind of pull back for a second, and just that pulling back for a second and asking why can help us make better choices about what our response might be to a particular issue or to a particular person, or thinking about a person's possibilities and motives. So just in a nutshell, just pause and think before reacting.
Yeah, that's it. Christy just messaged. We have 5 minutes left. Wow, time has really flown. One of the things, it's it's a large, we didn't get here, yesterday, right? The hundreds of years that has been in the works and regarding, the racism and the inequity has been a long time coming, and now finally, it's okay. Well, this is enough. How do we change? And of course, you mentioned, Dotcy, it's not an overnight thing, but there are very small steps. And look at, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So, some of the things that can be done, if anyone is like saying, I really don't know, I really want to do something, but I want to be a part of change, but I don't know what to do. What would you tell someone? How do they start?
Uh, if we're talking about folks that are in the professional space and the broker side, I think, again, diving more deeply into this training, you don't have to be a member. Josh mentioned a couple of different organizations that are in the real estate business that he's a part of. Well, you don't have to be a quote unquote minority to join those committees or go to a committee meeting or understand and learn about it. So that would be that. If you're a person who's not even in this business, but is understanding, I tell people, find a cultural celebration for people that don't look like you. If you're in Seattle, go to the International District and eat in a different restaurant, and find when there is an Asian culture event, find when there's an event for a different group, and go in there and meet folks who are not like you. Start operating outside your circle, and then you'll begin to gather an appreciation and build your sense of empathy and understanding and learning about other people. And then you can figure out how can you connect and maybe support some of their communities and organizations. There's always that opportunity. So I'd say that's a quick one. Josh, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I like all of those things. I think it's about stepping in. We have to, especially, from people who have been in the dominating position of culture and finance, and we have to step in and ask these questions. It's almost like like, why is a great question. Like, why are these things been like this? And if you've ever been around a child, that's their like primary question. Why? And I think it's just because they're seeking understanding. They're seeking what's underneath the action that they're trying to someone's trying to get them to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that. And, but one of them is to learn. I think that's definitely the first step. Start reading some books, start reading some articles, and then start taking action. I think action is a huge part of that. And sometimes it's taking an extra training. Sometimes it's donating to a great cause or getting involved or volunteering. And I think there's that action part of it is definitely something that we're really looking at the TCRA is like, okay, well, how do we start moving the needle here? And I will mention that there is a great cultural event in Lacey. I think it's March 12th. And it's just a multicultural fair at the local St. Martin's College. So definitely going to go to that, and we're going to see how we can get involved with that with the table later in the maybe next year. But just start stepping in.
Yeah, and I know we need to wrap because we have a couple meetings after this, but and this conversation is so much bigger and broader. And without necessarily explanation, there's one thing that I see that you have in your name, Dotcy, and we talk about right now. It's a great conversation about Black History Month and to be able to bring awareness on the diversity in that way. But also at the end of your name, you have he, him, and that is also another. There are so many ways that inclusion and diversity and equity apply beyond just race, and I think we're just starting to chip that surface right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, but we could go down there and I could talk forever about it. But obviously, he, him is expressing my pronouns, and we've had a society where people feel their understanding of themselves is different sometimes than what we might assume by visually looking at them. And so the idea of putting pronouns there is, one, people understand what is my orientation? How do I think of myself? The other thing is it tells others that they might be safe in terms of asking me or sharing where they are.
Nice.
Yeah.
And would love to continue, but I know we have a hard stop here. Davina, you brought us in. Do you want to kind of bring us home too?
Yeah, we absolutely. I know that we have some things that are going on. Just make sure you check out our Facebook. Check out our webpage. There's a link that is going in as well in regards to the activities and the events that we have that are going on. As we wrap up today, just want to really thank everyone that is here. This is not comfortable conversation, right? And what, Dotcy, what you said is basically, if you want to get involved with something, you got to get uncomfortable kind of until you get somewhat comfortable, and maybe not ever comfortable, but just keep staying uncomfortable in conversations. We talk about that even in our real estate business, but now, relationally, we need to start talking to people that don't look like us. We need to start leaning into new relationships of people that maybe don't think like us. And it can really open up the door to the biases that we thought we didn't have when we start actually having those conversations. Again, we do all bleed the same blood, but we are different, and different is good. And that's what we need to start embracing and learning about each other. If we are different, and that we are different, and that is good. So, so as we wrap up, do we want to go through kind of the stuff that we have going on here, or are we just saying, hey,
No.
bye, we love you guys?
No, and Donna said it's been very educational and eye-opening, and we need a part 2.
Yes, and a 3, I'm sure.
Yeah. There's no bad time to talk about it. And 2 years ago, Davina, while you were talking about that, I couldn't even imagine having a conversation publicly about this 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been the stage has been more inviting for this conversation now than it has ever been. It has ever been. So, and thank you for the people. I mean, it took a person, it took someone, it took a group of people stepping out and saying, hey, whether it's through, protesting, whether it's through, just being able to, have a platform to just share. Now the conversation is becoming more comfortable, even though it's not comfortable completely. So,
well, I think they started asking the question Josh asked, which is, at first there were a lot of angry people.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people started asking, why are they angry? Rather than just responding to the anger they're seeing, they started asking, why are they angry?
Exactly. And that started raising questions. And then people started to be heard, and people started being more open to listen. And, so.
Or even for you to talk about it or see it for yourself.
Absolutely. I think all of us, every single one of us, whether we're right here, we all have an experience, and whatever color you are, whatever background you are, whatever creed, you have an experience, and your experience is important. And if you think you don't have an experience, that's your experience. Seriously, we all do have an experience, and we need to just share that. And every experience is different, and understanding and being open. And I haven't, even me personally haven't shared a lot of things that I probably have gone through, because I just, and didn't even realize I had gone through anything until I was like, was that was maybe not right, so. Yeah, got a lot to learn.
It takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Of willing to say, maybe I don't know everything, or maybe I was wrong, which for humans.
Josh, I'm a he, him, and I have no vulnerability, so I don't know what to do.
Just keep joking it away, Jeremy.
All right.
Only playing.
Okay.
Well, I know
so-
Steve's got a class, and we've got a wrap up. And Dotcy, really appreciate your time, your wisdom and experience on this, and would love to actually be able to explore, and maybe even if we did the forum a little different, just to have more open conversation. Just really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. I know we're at the top of the hour. I appreciate being a part of it and being asked and invited, both to John L. Scott and to this group, and learning and meeting you. And I am a quote unquote expert, but you're learning every day, and I learn every day as well. No one arrives, and if you think you've arrived, you've lost it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you, Dotcy.
yeah, so Steve, well, who wants to take us out? And since we're like
Yeah,
going
Steve,
out.
you are a great observer on things, which means you are probably the wisest of us all. So you want to take us out with a Be Bold today?
Yes, let's do this, Dotcy. We're going to reach out and bring you back in for more stuff. We really appreciate your time. So, all right, you guys, we'll go out with Big Be Bold. 1, 2, 3. Be bold.
Be bold.
Bold.
Awesome. And we'll explain it all later.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.